Hey, how's it going, guys? My name is Dom, and today I'll be showing you how to create these expandable sections using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Now, this here is relatively simple to create, and you can add it to your existing website if you wish. So how do they work? Well, we can see here we have an expandable section, which means I can click on the header and it's going to have a nice transition to essentially collapse the content inside of it. And you can put whatever content you like within here. It should all work perfectly fine with little to no changes. And of course, it's notable to mention on the right side, we have a little chevron icon, which is going to toggle between an expanded or a collapsed state with the icon rotating. So how do we go about doing this? Well, going inside this tab right here, let's begin from scratch to create what I just showed you. So we're going to be beginning with the HTML, then moving on to the CSS, and then lastly, add a bit of JavaScript to make the expandable toggle work. All right. So beginning with the HTML, I just want to quickly mention that I've got a linked up CSS style sheet and a linked up JavaScript file. I'm sure you have similar on your existing website. If not, you can simply create those two files and then link them inside your HTML. Fantastic. So beginning with the HTML markup for the expandable section, we're going to be representing an entire expandable section using a div with a class of expandable, just like this. So this here is the entire section, including the title bar at the top and the content. Speaking of the title bar, let's make a new div to represent that. We can say expandable __ title dash bar. Okay, so of course, this here represents the entire green title bar, which I just showed you. Now, the title bar contains both the title and the chevron icon. So let's just stick with the title for now, and we'll come back to the icon. So let's make a new span with a class of expandable __ title, and inside here we can just say expandable section number 1 or whatever you want it to be called. Okay, so we're going to come back to the icon, but just hopping down below the title bar, let's make a second div for the expandable content. We can just say here expandable __ content dash wrapper. Okay, so I'm going to get to the details of why we need a wrapper around the content once we get to the CSS part. But basically, in order for the transition to work with the smooth animation on the height of the section, we need to have a wrapper. So yeah, I'm going to come back to that towards the middle of this video when we work on the CSS. But for now, we have the wrapper there. Inside the wrapper, we need the expandable content itself. So we can say here, expandable __ content. And within here, this is where you would now place your paragraphs or whatever it might be. So I'm going to simply copy and paste the same paragraph tags, which I used in my example at the beginning of this video. So I go inside here and just press Ctrl+V to paste that in. We can save this and go back in the browser here, and it currently looks like this, okay? Now, before adding the CSS for these elements, I want to include an icon library to give us the chevron on the top right, okay? So going inside this tab right here, this here is Ionicons, one of my favorite icon libraries to use for this kind of thing. I'll leave it linked down below so you can, of course, click on it and open this website. Once you're here, you can see that you can scroll down to see all these different icons. Now, we want the chevron icon. So I'll do a search here for chevron, and I'm going to also choose the field type. You can choose sharp or outline if you like, but I'm going to choose a field icon type. I also want to choose this icon right here, okay? Once you've chosen chevron-back, there is a code snippet on the bottom here, which tells you how to use that icon. I can copy this, okay? So you can click on it to copy it. Then go back inside VS Code. I'm just going to paste that code underneath the span where the expandable title bar is. We can also give this a class of expandable __ icon. I'll save this, go back in the browser, and we can see nothing actually happens. There was no changes. That's because we need to now include the Ionicons library on the page for it to actually work. So in the usage section, we can go up here and I can simply copy these two script tags, and as instructed right here, it says to place them near the end of the body in a script tag. So back inside here, let's go at the end of my body tag. Press Ctrl V to paste that in. I'll save this now, go back in the browser, and we can see the icon is now visible right at the end of that text. Okay, so everything is now in place in terms of the HTML. We can now move forward to the CSS to make this here look like this here, right? Fantastic. So going back inside VS Code, let's go inside the index.css file and firstly target the expandable class, okay? For this one, we're going to be giving it a max width of 500 pixels, a margin of 1 EM, top and bottom, and 0 for left and right, just to give it some space between other elements. A font size of 16 pixels, so just to standardize the font size across the entire element itself, and a font family of Inter, and then sans serif, of course. This here is going to be up to you guys, right? All of this stuff here. Save this back in the browser and we get this here. So a very small change, of course, regarding the font family and the max width, which is now visible. If I try to expand any more, we can see it stops at about 500 pixels across the page. Okay. Now we can move on to the expandable title bar. So down here we can say expandable __ title - bar. And for the title bar, we're going to give this a display of flex and align items of center and a justify content of space between. So these three properties are going to allow the title, the actual title text, and the chevron icon to be vertically aligned in the center with align items of center, and a space between justify content is going to make sure that, as we can see now, the icon is spaced, I guess what I'm trying to say is both the title and the icon are spaced apart. That's what the space between value is doing there. So we have the icon on the right side, title on the left side. So back inside here, more properties for the title bar are going to be a padding value set to 12 pixels, okay? Actually, let's make that 14 pixels. Also a user select of none, okay? A background color of the dcode green 009578, of course up to you guys. A text color of white, okay? This is also going to affect the icon inside of there. And a border dash radius here of, let's go for 6 pixels, 6 pixels, 0 and 0. So this here just means top left 6 pixels, top right 6 pixels, 0 and 0 for the bottom left and bottom right. And lastly here, a cursor of pointer. I'm going to stop here, go back in the browser and see what's changed. Okay, so we have something like this. We can see here that we have this cursor of pointer, which indicates to the user that they can click on this top section, and everything else is pretty self-explanatory, just some different background color, text color, some border radius, some padding, and so on. Now, in terms of these values for both the padding and the border radius, I want to put these inside CSS properties or CSS variables. That way I can reuse them across other elements, which we're going to get to very shortly. But just so they're all in one place, I want to put them up inside the expandable section. So at the top here, within expandable, I'm going to say --xy padding to declare a new CSS property called xy padding and a value of 14 pixels. Same thing for the border dash radius of 6 pixels. So now I can reference that within my style sheet. I can say var for the padding equal to xy padding. And for both these 6 pixel declarations here, I can say var dash dash border radius just like this. Okay. Now I'm just going to save this and go back in the browser here, refresh, and we get the exact same result. So those properties did in fact work. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on now to the next section, which is going to be the expandable __ title. So the actual text itself, going to give this a font weight of bold. pretty standard. Save this back in the browser, and it is now bold. The next large part of this style sheet is going to be the expandable content itself. So we can target that right now. We can say expandable __ content. Firstly, giving this a padding of 0 for the top and bottom. But for the left and right, we're going to give it the exact same padding which we used for the title bar. That way it's all consistent. So to achieve that, we're going to say var once again, --xy padding for the left and right, and we can see here the benefit of declaring that variable, because now we can reuse the same value without repeating it twice inside the content and of course the title bar. Okay. Also give this a line height of 1.4. It's up to you guys if you want to put a line height here or on the paragraph tags themselves. It's going to be up to your own website and the way it currently works. Okay. Also give this a font size of 0.85 EM, or other words, 85% of the current font size, and the current font size is declared by the parent expandable, which is currently 16 pixels. Okay. Also a border here of 1 pixel solid, and then a very light gray here. Okay, and a border dash top of none. So basically this just means that only the left, bottom and right borders are going to be affected by this border value. I'll save this, go back in the browser to see some results, and we get something like this. Let's also put a border radius on the bottom left and bottom right here, just to match the one that was set in the title bar. So we can say here border dash radius and simply copy what we had here, but swap the values around. So now it's going to be 0 and 0 for the top and the top left and top right, and of course that value for the bottom left and bottom right. Save this back in the browser, and we get this here. It's looking good, but there is one small problem, and we can see that the margin which is set by the paragraph is creating a space between the title bar and the content. So of course there are a couple of ways to go about doing this, each with their own benefits and disadvantages. I'm going to be showing you one of the simplest ways to get around this, and that is going to be to have a overflow of hidden on your expandable content. Save this back in the browser, and the space has now disappeared, which means that the border is going to match up nicely with the top part there. So you could, of course, instead say for, let's say, the top and bottom elements, set no margin, or have your margin be placed in some other means or whatever it might be. But yeah, that's how to get rid of that space there. And we basically have most, if not all, of the stylistic things complete. We now need to work out how we can make it so when you click on it, it's going to expand or collapse that content. So the way it's going to work is through this expandable content wrapper. Now, I had to find a solution online to see how we can do this. There are ways people get around it by using a max height on the content, because a max height is going to be, let's say you say max height of 1000 pixels. That 1000 pixels is animatable, which means if you have a transition property on your content, you can essentially toggle the height between 0 and that max content, and it's going to give you a nice smooth animation. Because it's just not possible with a height of auto. The solution which I found for doing this involves using grid template rows. I'll leave a link down below in the description to the website which I found this solution from. And the way it works is essentially, if we target the expandable content wrapper here, so I'll just say expandable __ content dash wrapper. If we target this wrapper, we can give this a display of grid, okay, and give it a grid template rows of 0FR. So if I was to save this, go back in the browser, we can see that we get this right here. There is no, there is just no content anymore. So having that value of 0FR is going to give us that effect. And what we can do now is we can actually say when we want to toggle open the expandable content, let's set this to be 1FR, okay? So let's go at the top right here, and just underneath the expandable section, we're just going to say expandable -- open. So declaring a new CSS class for the opened state of the expandable section. We can then say when the expandable section has the open class, we'll target the expandable content wrapper again. And for this one, we're going to say grid template rows. Like I said just then, make this now 1FR. Save this back in the browser and we get, of course, the same result. But this time, if I go inside the elements section here, on the expandable class, let's add a new class for -- open. Let me just expand this now. So adding this modifier class to the expandable section, if I press enter, it is now going to be visible. So essentially the JavaScript is going to toggle this on and off when you click on the top section here, but just for testing purposes right now, we can use the dev tools. So that right there works. And the amazing thing about it is we can add a transition property. Let's say transition grid template rows for, let's just do 0.3 milliseconds. Okay, then say ease out as the timing function. So now if I save this, go back in the browser, if I remove this class, okay, press enter, then go back and add it back on. It didn't work. Fantastic. Let me just double check why that didn't work. So transition for grid template rows, 0.3, okay, my mistake, 0.3 seconds, not milliseconds. My mistake. Save this and try again back in the browser. I'm going to remove that expandable -- open, press enter, and we can see here, got a nice smooth transition for that height. Put it back and we get the exact same thing, this time in reverse. So that's how we can achieve that transition on the heights. And what's also amazing is if I was to have content underneath it, for example, something like this back in the browser, this content is also going to be, essentially collapsed underneath it and it's going to move alongside it. So that right there is going to give you a really nice effect, okay? Now, going back inside here, that is one part of getting this to work. I now want to actually jump into the JavaScript before moving on back to the CSS to get that chevron to rotate from top to bottom. So going inside the JavaScript file here, we're going to be adding a delegated event listener. This just means that we're going to attach a click event to the document body, and we're going to make it so when you click on the title bar, toggle that open class on and off. But the reason why it's delegated is because if you were to dynamically add multiple more sections to your web page, you don't need to go back in there and add a new event listener for every single expandable section. So this code here is going to work perfectly fine. We'll say document.body.addEventListener. Listen for the click event, okay? We're going to grab onto the event object, just like this. And then within here, we're going to have two constants. One, which tells us if we clicked on the expandable title, and the second one is going to be the expandable section itself. So we can say here const is expandable title. We can figure this out by taking a look at the element which was clicked on. So we'll say here ev.target.closest and pass in here expandable _ title -bar. Okay. Then I'm going to console log what this value is just to see what it actually does. And I'll save this back in the browser. If I click on somewhere down here, on a refresh, actually it needs to be up here because the body ends about here. So click up here and still nothing. Okay. Document body add event listener, click event. That's been included. Okay, so, my mistake. I was actually clicking on some margin. So let me just add some more content just to demonstrate this, guys. I'll say here, content down here, save this back in the browser. If I was to click elsewhere on the page, we get null. So we get null for EV target closest expandable title bar. If I click on the title bar, we of course get that value. So what this means is basically, have you clicked on the title bar? Because this here is a null or an element, we can add a double exclamation mark here to convert this into a true or false. Back in the browser, click down here, we get false. Up here, we get true. Okay, fantastic. So now we can make a second variable called const expandable equal to ev.target.closest, then say .expandable just like this. I won't go into what the closest method does, but if you're interested, I've got a video all about the closest method. It's actually one of the most powerful and most useful methods in the JavaScript DOM. So now this is just saying, look, once you're on the title, give me the expandable section itself. So give me this whole parent container, this expandable class. Okay, back in the browser, let's try this once again. This time log out the expandable section. Back here, click down here, we get nothing of course because there is no expandable section being clicked on here. Up here, we now instead get the expandable section. So what do we do now? We just say, if we did not click on the expandable title, we can return out of this function and stop right here and don't go any further. Otherwise, if we did click on the expandable title, we can just say expandable.classList.toggle and toggle that class of expandable -- open. Save this back in the browser, click on this and it opens up, click it again and it goes away. Amazing, okay? So the last part of this video is going to be the chevron in the top right corner. So going back inside VS Code here, inside the index.css file, let's rotate that chevron. So we're actually going to make a new CSS property here for the amount of time for the transition to take place. We can say --transition -milliseconds equal to 0.3 seconds, just like this. And now down here, we can just say for the icon, let's just actually hop down underneath the title here. So for the icon, we're going to say expandable _ icon, okay? And we'll say transition for transform for var -- transition milliseconds. So basically, it's going to take, again, 0.3 milliseconds for the transform property to change. And we can also make this for the grid template rows to make it, of course, reusable there. And the reason why I've chosen to say transform here is because we're going to use the transform property to rotate the icon. Speaking of that, at the top here, we're going to say, again, when the expandable -- open class is there, we're going to target the icon this time. And we're going to say for the icon, transform, and we'll say rotate at negative, just here, at -90 degrees. Okay, I can now save this and go back in the browser here, click on this, and we can see it rotates down, click it again, and it goes back. So that right there is how to build an expandable section using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. If this video helped you out, make sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video.